All right. Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. So today we have a special show. We're going to be getting some updates on the Razor tools. And so we'll start with introductions. I'm John Galloway. I'm a PM on the .NET community team. I don't know. Let's go clockwise. So I guess, Phil, you're next.
He's on the mute.
In the right stage. Hey, I'm Phil Allen. I'm actually the new manager over the Razor area for Visual Studio.
Awesome. I'm Dan Roth. I'm a product manager on the ASP.NET team.
Hey, I'm Allison, and I'm a software engineer on the Razor team.
Awesome. All right. Well, as always, we start with some community links. I have a grab bag, just a few random links. I think they're fun and also quite all over the place, which is just great today. So we'll do that. I'm sharing them in the chat. And there's also a banner where you can find them. And let's get going. Okay, so the first one, this is just kind of a neat one. This is mixing Giraffe, HTMX, and Blazor together. So a lot of just kind of different things. Giraffe is an F# framework for building ASP or ASP.NET Core. And then HTMX is kind of interesting. I don't know if you folks have seen this. It is an attribute-based way of kind of programming modern user interfaces. So like you can, I don't know, I've seen a lot of people in community playing with this over time lately. Like I know Khalid Abu Hakma does a lot of stuff with this. So kind of like, using these HTML attributes to kind of wire up things. So in this one, he's going through and then also hooking that up with Blazor. So kind of very terse syntax to wire all this together. And so he kind of walks through. You'll see here where we've got, like, for instance, hooking up with the different like HX get, HX target, etc. And so wiring up the a form and kind of a nice simple dashboard sample. So
that's quite the mix, I gotta say. Like that,
yes, it is like.
Oh man, yeah. I'm curious, like how we got, because there's like some of those things. I imagine would have a little bit of friction to put together. Like Blazor and Razor these days is fairly C# heavy. So like C# and F#. I mean, you can obviously write F# code and use it in your Blazor app, but like the Razor syntax itself is very C# based. And then HTMLX, you got like JavaScript now thrown into the mix. So, Blazor messing with the DOM, HTMLX messing with the DOM. I'm fascinated. I wonder how they reconciled all of that.
Yeah, interesting. And I didn't get to dig through the code, but yeah, it's interesting. Like you're saying, mixing all the different things together is kind of nice. And it's pretty amazing here. Like this is just a few lines of code, and doing quite a bit there. So, all right. So next up, we've got a very deep post. This is part 6 in Andrew Locke's series, digging deep into minimal APIs. So this is behind the scenes of minimal APIs. This one is creating the response writing expression for request delegate. I last shared this when Damian Edwards and David Fowler were on the call, and Damian was like, okay, like this is cool, but this is not for most people, so this is if you really want to know what's going on under the hood, how things are getting hooked up and the kind of flow, what calls what and stuff. This goes pretty deep there. So
yeah, we like minimal APIs are kind of interesting in that they took a lot of functionality that we normally think of as being part of MVC, but they brought it way lower in the stack. Like at the middleware layer of ASP.NET Core is really where minimal APIs is operating, like at the routing layer of the stack. So a bunch of functionality that was kind of tied up in MVC became much more generic, like much more reusable by really anyone. Like if you're writing maybe your own framework and you're not using MVC, this created opportunities to build on top of these primitives for things like model binding and routing and so forth. They're way lower in the stack, so they can be much more broadly used.
It seems like, from digging through this series of posts, there's some stuff in here, for instance, like where it's really kind of like documenting some of those extensibility layers and how those things are hooked up. So for somebody that, like you're saying, wants to do a custom implementation, this post series would be pretty helpful. Cool. All right, here's a quite silly one. Vulcan writing, he's creating images using Dolly 2 and Twilio SMS, and with ASP.NET Core to hook it together. So ASP.NET Core on the front end, Twilio is a great system for kind of calling into a bunch of different APIs, and of course working with SMS. And so hooking up, you've got to create your accounts, you've got to wire them together. And then after that, not a lot of code necessary actually in your ASP.NET app. That's just kind of the front end. So this is nice. The excuse me, the Twilio call. And so then, of course, the payoff, we've got to see what we actually get at the end. And we get
some cat pictures. Is that what this is? Like,
well, it's a cat and a dog. And as he says, and I have to agree, the cat looks a little weird. So, yeah, the dog looks fine, but the cat looks a little strange. So, yeah.
Has a few extra feet, I think, there on that.
Yeah. Which always seems to be the problem, right? Number of limbs and number of digits is always off. All right, here's just a nice simple one. This is Blazor split container. This is from Jay Sakamoto, who is always does tons of cool stuff. So this is a split container. So the actual code for this, super lightweight. And then there's also, spoiler alert there. Okay. There's also a nice little simple demo here, so you can go through and play with it, live on the screen. So
nice.
I don't know. Yeah.
Jay Sakamoto does great stuff. Like, it's the same person who did the static site rendering for Blazor, I think, as well.
That's right.
I think we used this library on the QuickGrid demo site
right. Yeah. I mean, just like you're saying, just tons and tons of cool stuff. So, yeah. All right. Just a few more here. I've got one from Joseph here. This is on hooking up Yarn with ASP.NET Core projects. So the way he's set this up, he's got Yarn for managing his local dev project or local dev libraries. So he shows, kind of doing the Yarn setup. And then in production, he's using CDNs. So this is the actual, trying to get the scroll right here. So here, we've got, this is the CDN reference. And so then he's using the environment tags to set that up. So locally, he's using the Yarn manage CSS and JavaScript. And then in production, he can go over and use the, so environment exclude development, everything else, staging and production, using the CDN libraries. So kind of some nice just reminder, but it's good to see kind of hooking this up with Yarn. So, all right, the last one I've got for you here is from Tom, and this is on using systemd with containers for .NET apps. So a lot of, I think he's posted before about using systemd to host applications. This adds a container to it. And so here, systemd is hosting the container, which has the .NET application inside of it. So pretty simple .NET application here. This is something I wasn't aware of, that .NET 7 included support for containers managed by systemd. I totally did not see that. So there's a package, Microsoft Extensions Hosting Systemd, and then shows, creating pretty standard image. And then here he's using Podman, which is an alternative to Docker, and then creating the systemd unit, and then just hosting and running it. So, and yeah, so cool stuff. And I think I'm done. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll turn it over to you folks.
All right. If you can bring on up our slide. Do you bring up the slides, or do we bring up the slides?
I do. Yep.
First time presenter, long time listener. Hi, welcome. We're here from the Razor editor team at Microsoft. We're here at the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. We have here a portion of the team. John brought us on and kind of introduced us at the beginning. but if we just kind of move forward, you'll see like a little bit more, just a little bit more in depth here. But I would like to point out that we are something like half the team, that there's a number of other people who are currently on the team. There's people who used to be on the team, and we'll be showing a little bit of the stuff, kind of a broad swath of things that have been done in the last, I think it's about 1.5 years since we've been here. So we're going to try to show that swath, and the people who worked on those things are not necessarily the people here in front of you today. And we're presenting their great work. So I just want to make sure that, like, you don't see the three of us, they did it all. Like, no. Like, this is a team effort, and this is the portion of the team that happens to be here today. So things that were in progress when last we met. So if you go back to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up, someone nicely put in August of 2021 there. We're working on the new kind of architecture for how editors were going to work, our portion of it for Razor in particular, called LSP. I'm going to look to John here. Is this topic LSP come up here previously in the community stand-up?
It has, but it doesn't hurt to, if you want to
Sure.
high level explain it a bit.
So LSP allows us to abstract away some portions that are language specific from portions of editing files that are language agnostic, so that teams that are really good at doing all those language agnostic things can make them really great and make them shared across all languages. And people who are really into the specifics of the language, now people, this being the engineers at Microsoft mainly, who really understand the details of the language and the way that it interacts and the way that it does completion lists and the way that it provides code actions and the way that it does formatting. Those are things that can be really language specific. And by providing that abstraction layer, it makes it really clear when there's an issue, more or less, here's where it belongs, and allows people to optimize the section that they need to be responsible for while sharing as much as possible. So that was in progress at the last time, and now it's the default. And so as people are using, we'll say 17.4, which I think is the most recent G8 version of Visual Studio, or 17.5, I think Preview 6 came out today. As you're using those, you will by default be using the LSP server, or the LSP-based Razor editor for all your ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET 6, 7 sorts of projects. .NET Framework's done a little bit differently because it has a lot of differences that are hard to iron over there. Now, for the features we were working on at the time, like taking a block of code, extracting it to code behind, dealing with usings a little bit better, going to definition, making hot reload work so that you make an edit in your .razor file, your .cshtml, you press the hot reload button and the changes end up present. Those are all things that were in progress. And of course, there's lots of little things like formatting that we want to make improvements on and have a bit better. So for the most part, those things are already in and have been in for a while. I think many of them would have shipped with, I'm going to try to get this right, 17.1, 17.0, 17.2. It's hard when I think about what was going on in August of 2021. Like, what exact version was the next version?
Yeah.
Nothing else going on in the world then. But some things that we've done, we've made a number of other edits, a number of other changes that make the editing of Razor files feel a bit more like other editors in Visual Studio, make it feel more complete, leverage other components and other work being done by other teams. So for instance, one thing is pretty common in like the HTML portion of your Razor files is to say, I've got this tag, but I need to put a container around it so I can do things. So you have like a quick way to wrap in a div. And well, now that you can add some properties, whether you want to deal with layout or you want to put like class equals and get it to flow exactly where you want it to be. Just as much, there's an HTML, like if you're at an HTML file, and we're leveraging this now, where you can go actually remove the tag. So kind of the inverse of that, adding a tag. Well, one of the code actions is to remove the tag. So it's like, I've kind of removed all the properties. Let me go just remove that tag, but leave all the contents behind. Go to definition, works better, control click for it. Also is able to find inside of component attributes, the uses of things. Which is not exactly go into definition. It's kind of like go to the next reference, but it's very much like sort of a improve nicety where the user person editing that Razor file, that CSHTML file, can say, hey, I want to do this. And we just make it faster. So we can put their little decisions about what they want to do next a bit closer together. Another neat thing is like drag and drop of files into Razor files and like kind of automatically generating the links the right way. We're doing hot reload for Blazor WebAssembly projects. And one thing we'll talk a little bit more about is perf and reliability, because that's always a thing that, we want to make it better. We want to make it faster. We want to make it, when you try to do something, it does exactly what you wanted. And that as you make your edits, they stick around, and you can, having decided to do this thing and accomplished it, it sticks with you. So I'm going to turn this over to Daniel so he can do a bit of a demo.
Try and show some of these things. Let's show them working. Sure. All right, great. John, can you switch over so that my screen is shared? And then we'll try and show some of these features. Is that big enough? Can people see? Maybe I'll make it a little bigger. How about that? That good? Okay. So let's see some of the new. We're going to take a look at some of the new features that we've added since the last time we spoke with you all. So that's about over a year's worth of stuff. I'll also highlight some of the features that we even shipped with the new Razor LSP based editor in case you missed some of those features. I saw some comments where people were like, what? Wait, it actually supports that feature? I didn't even know that. And those are features that we even shipped with the original release of the LSP editor. Like one of them that I saw that I have to show, because this one was one I was really happy that came in, is the adding of using directives. So if you have some code in Razor, like say weather forecast, which is a type that I've got defined over here in this data folder. So it's got a different namespace than this index.razor file, which is sitting at the root. And if you control dot, you can see, yes, you do in fact get code actions to like add a using directive at the top so that you get your using directives for your code. So that's there. That's actually been there since we shipped 17.0. Really cool feature that we get with it's one of the things that the new Razor LSP editor really made possible for us to release. I did want to, while I'm doing this, want to clarify that if there are any folks that are doing ASP.NET development, there is a different Razor editor that's used by the old ASP.NET stack. So everything I'm showing you, this is for ASP.NET Core. So ASP.NET Core, Blazor, the Razor editor that we're working on is for that set of users. There's a different one that gets used for like the old MVC stack and so forth. Okay, so that's adding using directives. Let's do wrapping with div. So if I select some text, and this isn't a UI gesture, it's a keyboard shortcut. So Shift-Alt-W will wrap the selected text with a div. And the nice thing about it is it will actually highlight the text of the div so that if you want to change that to a p tag or whatever, you get completions over this. You can really wrap content with any tag that you want. So that's Shift-Alt-W. We can add another div that wraps around the entire content. So it's a really easy way to wrap some content with a div or really any tag that you'd like. You can then arrow to the right and then you add your attributes and so forth. So that's wrapping content with a tag. Similarly, there's in 17.5, like in the preview channel, there are some new HTML actions, code actions that you can use to remove wrapping tags while leaving the interior content. So if you want to pull that div off again while leaving the inside stuff, there's now code actions that enable you to do that. So you can wrap with the div with Shift-Alt-W, and you can remove the wrapping tag using the new code actions. That's new in 17.5 preview. So if you're not seeing that in stable, that's because you need the new preview release in order to get that particular feature.
There's a question, Dan, about can you control dot? I think what they're saying is, can you wrap using the control dot? Could the wrapping be in the control dot menu as well?
As like a code action? Today, that's not the case. Like there's no, like if I do a control dot right here, you can see the, if I do control, I'm not hitting control dot, there we go. I'm only getting the remove.
Okay.
Great feature request. Like we will actually be talking a little bit later today about how we can get your feedback and your feature suggestions and any issues that you're hitting with the Razor editor, where to send that feedback so that we can get it appropriately prioritized and put on our backlog. But we'll take a note of that one, that people would like that to be a code action. I agree. It's a little weird that it only has a keyboard shortcut today and has no corresponding like UI presence. Cool. Let's talk about navigation. So like go to definition. Like let's say I wanted to go to the definition of this survey prompt component. This is a component that's defined in the solution. I can, of course, like right click and do go to definition. I'll right to click go to definition, and that will bring me right to the survey prompt component. I can go back and then use the F12 shortcut, and that brings me there. But new with the new LSP Razor editor is you can actually hold down the control key, and then the component tag will turn into a link. And if I click on that, that will also do a go to definition. So if you like mouse and you want to do a go to definition with the mouse, that's an easy thing to do now. Same thing with the component parameter attributes, like this title parameter. You can see it also turns into a link, and that will jump me right to the part of the component code that defines that particular parameter, the particular property definition. So that's go to definition. You can just control click in order to get a link-like experience for navigating your component code. I wanted to show drag and drop of components. This is kind of fun. So if you wanted to add, I didn't know about this feature until like this week. If you want to add a component to your Razor file, you can just drag and drop the Razor file. Like let's say I wanted to add another survey prompt, like below this one. I can go into the Solution Explorer. Oh, I didn't mean to bring that up. I can grab the Razor file and just drag it in, and it will generate a component tag for me, which is kind of nice. Even more interesting, if we go back to the code for survey prompt, and let's say I change this title parameter to be editor required, like that, and then let's go back. You can see now I'm getting a little squiggle on this survey prompt tag because it doesn't define doesn't pass a value for the title parameter. So let's get rid of that one and do another one. If I drag and drop in, and it will recognize that it has an actual required parameter, and it will go ahead and add the attribute for you. So that's drag and dropping of Razor files in order to get components onto your editor. It's kind of nice. All right, outlining. And see, let me get rid of some of this code, clean this up a bit. And let's go to survey prompt. In the code block for survey prompt, you can see we just have a property right now, but we do get code folding now in the C# code blocks in your Razor file. Like I can collapse and expand the code block. If I have some code in here that has sub blocks, like let's add do something method and so forth, and code folding will kick in for that as well. So you get full C# style code folding inside of your code blocks. We can even do like regions. Let's do end region down here, and that all works just fine. And we get again full code folding. I think this was one of those features that was missing when we first shipped Visual Studio version 17 and the new Razor editor. It's now fully supported because this is just C#. So your C# editing experience should be as close to the normal C# editing experience in a C# file as possible when you're working in Razor. Now, some people, I actually really like having the code block in the Razor file. Like I like having all the code for my component in one place, like the logic for the UI handling and the UI itself all together. Other folks have a different opinion and prefer that the C# code is separate. Like they like the code behind pattern, where your markup is in just the Razor file, and then most of the C# code lives in a code behind file. You can do that too. And in fact, there's a code action for doing that. You can extract block to code behind, and that will take care of taking this code block and moving it to a code behind file. Let me get rid of some of those using statements. And so now if we look in the Solution Explorer, you can see we have a survey prompt.razor.cs file that was created for us, where it put all the code that was in that code block and put it inside this partial class for the survey prompt component. So in survey prompt.razor, we no longer have that code block. It was all moved into survey prompt.razor.cs. But that's extract to code behind if that's the pattern that you prefer. It's fully supported. Let's do find all references. So like this title property, this is a parameter. We can right click and do find all references on this, and we get find all references not just for the C# code, for the markup code, but also even in like Blazor syntax where it's being used. So here, if we click on this one on the bottom, that's the actual property. The next one up, that's where in the markup, we're rendering the value of the title using that at syntax. In some sense, that's still C# code though, right? It's just basically a property accessor that's rendering the value of the title parameter. But even here in the index.razor file where we're using the survey prompt component, we're getting references to the the parameter where the attribute is being defined to set the parameter value. So across markup, code, and even component syntax, you're getting find all references support. And it works the other way as well. Like if we right click on the title attribute and just say find all references, same stuff. Like we see where it's being used as an attribute, where it's being used in markup, and then where it's actually being defined. So that's find all references. Rename and like refactoring gestures. So if I go onto this title, let me give myself a little more space. Let's right click and say I want to rename this title to something else like message, and we'll go ahead and commit that. That renamed obviously the property. If we go look in survey prompt.razor, it renamed where it was used, and it renamed even the attribute as well. So you can do rename on component parameters. You can do rename on the component tag itself, and that will propagate through all the appropriate files. No small feat, considering that you're dealing with Razor files and C# files. So it's pretty cool feature as well. So that's rename on parameters and also for components. That's a lot of Blazor stuff. Let's look in a CSHTML file, because Razor is not just about .razor files. It's also about CSHTML, like if you're doing MVC or if you're doing Razor pages. This particular project is a Blazor server project, which means most of the code in here is actually .razor files. These are all Blazor components. But because it's Blazor server, it's already set up to do pre-rendering, where the first request to the app will actually be handled by this underscore host.cshtml Razor page, which will render HTML directly to the response, including rendering the like Blazor components, like the full Blazor app inside of this page. So let's look at a few things in here. One thing that's kind of nice is like when you're setting up these link tags, one thing that we've always supported in the HTML editor that I think initially when we shipped the Razor editor, we didn't have support for, but now we do. If you want to just like drag and drop, like say a style sheet into here and have it generate the link tag for you, we can do that. Or if you have image files, you just want to drag and drop into the Razor editor, we'll generate the image tags for you as well. So that's drag and drop for like CSS, images, JavaScript files, that will work too. Also, we've done some work done a lot of work on formatting in Razor files. We'll be talking more about that later. But one thing that's now working is formatting of embedded JavaScript in Razor files. Down here at the bottom of this CSHTML file, we have a script tag that's just bringing in the Blazor server script. I'm going to copy just another script tag into here with some really poorly formatted JavaScript. And this will happen fast, but I'll undo it so you can see what the original code was. So if we paste, on paste formatting of the JavaScript code. If I undo it, here's what the JavaScript code originally looked like. Lots of crazy white space and indentations and weird curly braces. Format the doc. It'll format your JavaScript code within the Razor file. So that's kind of nice. So formatting of embedded JavaScript is now working. Obviously, we don't have colorization yet of the JavaScript. That's a little weird. That's something that we need to work on. But you do get like IntelliSense and stuff. Like if we go into the JavaScript code, we see the completions for the JavaScript variables and stuff. So it is a JavaScript editing experience. No colorization yet. That's something we still need to add. We have heard in general that formatting is kind of one of those spaces in Razor that is still got some wrinkles. Like we see feedback in our surveys that sometimes the Razor formatting in Visual Studio doesn't do what you want and messes up the formatting of your documents. That's an area that we're going to be actively investing in, and we're going to be looking for feedback from you. We'll be talking in a minute about how you can do that. But hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the new things that are available in Razor editing.
We got a few questions that came in, so probably good to run through some of them now before moving on.
Let's do it.
Okay. Jeff is asking about like the flow of like things and there was some argument in the discussion about like, hey, I see them fixed really quickly in preview. How long does it take? So what's the flow? Do we like get fixes into stable as well? Or is it like basically you need to, get on the previews if you want to see your fixes quickly?
Right. Yeah. So we ship a Visual Studio update, like a significant update, about once a quarter, I think is the cadence. So like 17.5 is the current update that's in preview. I think there's like a preview 6 version of it that's supposed to come out today, if I'm not mistaken. And pretty soon later this month, it's expected that will shift over to the stable channel. Then 17.5 will become stable version of VS that we encourage you all to use. And then about 3 months later, we'll have 17.6 will be presumably the next update. So that's one way that we get fixes to you, is that those quarterly updates of Visual Studio, bunch of fixes and features will come into through those channels. There is also a servicing channel. Like, we have the ability to patch the current stable channel of Visual Studio. So right now the stable channel is 17.4, and I think there have been at least 4 or 5 patches on that channel since it was originally released to address bugs and issues as people have reported them, to make sure that experience is as good and as productive as possible. So both are ways that we can get fixes to users. If the issues are severe, that's usually what leads us to do a patch release, which we can do in a more agile fashion, like on the order of weeks-ish for a given updated version. Most of the work, though, happens in those quarterly updates, like the minor version updates to Visual Studio.
Cool. Okay. So you're showing all these demos in Visual Studio. So there's a question about, is this specific to just Visual Studio Windows, or how does this relate to VS Code? That's
a great question. Allison, do you want to take that? Do you want to discuss a little bit about Visual Studio Code?
Sure. Well, we're going to discuss Visual Studio Code in a future slide, but there are some features that are currently Visual Studio exclusive, but we are working on feature parity for VS Code, so stay tuned. You should be able to at least get a pretty good editing experience today in Visual Studio Code as well.
Cool. Okay. There was one that you were showing an editor required in there, saying, and there was some discussion like, hey, we've got C# 11. What's the difference between editor required? Do we still need editor required? That kind of thing.
Yeah, great question. The required metadata that we put on Blazor components has it does not have a runtime semantic. Like when we did that feature, I think it was like .NET 5 when we introduced the idea of required component parameters. We did look to see whether we could have a runtime enforcement of that parameter actually being specified. But because of the extensibility of how Blazor components work, we couldn't really give a solid guarantee at runtime that the component was actually set. Hence the editor required qualification on it. It's really a design time tooling hint to your editor to let you know, like, hey, please give a warning if you see someone using this component, but this property is not actually being set in code. So don't rely. You can't rely. You still have to have runtime checks in your Blazor component code to see that if there's actually a value on the parameter, because it is possible, depending on how you've implemented your components, that the parameter might still not have been set, even if you apply that attribute. But that's why the semantic is a bit more specific than what you'd get with like the C# keywords or with the required attribute from the component model, the data annotations required attribute.
All right, and then welcome back. Okay, one more here. Question: are these implemented directly in Visual Studio, or are they Roslyn based? How does that work?
That sounds like an engineering question. I just use the features. I don't know how they're implemented.
I'm going to turn to Allison on this one, as I'm new on the space.
So some of the code actions we do take from Roslyn, and we kind of modify them a bit to fit the Razor world. Other code actions, like the extracted code behind, are specific to Razor, and we implement them directly in the Razor repo.
So it's kind of a mix, right? Like we have component-specific code actions. Like I think rename right now is like on the component syntaxes. That's a component-specific code action, right? Like that doesn't come from the C#. Like when you do F2 or rename on a component name, I think that's component-specific.
Yeah, we did that in the Razor repo.
Yeah, and then the C# ones, like anything you're doing inside of the code block with like normal C# code, presumably all those are being, or at least the majority of those are being handled using Roslyn. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the HTML code actions, so like the wrap with div thing. That's technically coming from the HTML infrastructure in Visual Studio, which, like, if you're in Visual Studio Code, you're using the HTML editor infrastructure from Visual Studio Code, which is different than the VS one. So those code actions don't surface in VS Code because they're implemented currently as VS specific features.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a mix. I mean, it's not super clean cut. Like we try to share as much as makes sense across, the Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio experiences. But there are some things that either for legacy reasons or because of practicality that end up being tied to one VS or the other.
All right. That's all the questions for now. Or do we have more from you, Dan, or are we on to?
That was me. That's what I had to show.
All right.
But we do want to talk a little bit more about Visual Studio Code, because we did just recently do a pretty major update to Visual Studio Code functionality.
Yeah, I think if you briefly bring up the slides, which slide do we want? Okay, so I think Allison was going to talk to these.
Yeah. So on the VS Code side of the world, the biggest news is that we released a new version of the C# extension about 2 weeks ago, version 1.25.4. And this version includes Razor updates. And this is pretty significant since this is the first time we've updated Razor in VS Code in about 1.5 years, give or take. And fun fact, through this release, we are able to close around 20% of the active VS Code issues in the Razor repo, which is pretty cool. And this release contains a few bug fixes, enhancements. One of the bug fixes, we had a pretty bad bug in Linux and Mac where sometimes you would close the VS Code editor, but you would still have that lingering Razor server process. And so you can end up with like a ton of just different processes in your task manager, for example, and just seeing all of them. But so that should be fixed now, along with completion behavior and some other bugs. And in terms of enhancements, the biggest piece is that we now support ARM64. And I think before you would get some sort of weird error, but everything should now work there as well. And we also improved some feature parity. For example, the document color picker is now a feature that is available in Visual Studio Code.
Cool. So updates for the open source community in particular. So if you were to look back in time, let's click where we intend to click. If you were to look back in time, there are actually 2 different Razor repos, because not only is there the kind of editor tooling sorts of stuff that we were showing there, but there's actually taking the Razor code itself and being able to like parse it and being like having the tooling be able to make sense of it, which is the compiler. And we move those 2 repos together because it actually makes it possible for someone to go make some changes in the compiler and make some changes in the tooling and press F5 and actually see the result all in kind of one go and actually see from the end to end in a much more efficient manner. And seeing as that there were 2 repos before that were subdivided, the new name of the repo is github.com/.net/Razor. So for people who are interested in tracking the issues, reporting issues there, or even doing some amount of contribution, like that is where you would go. But speaking about feedback, I'll give a quick aside. So Dan showed a behavior that was reported as a feedback thing, which is the lack of coloring in the JavaScript portion of those Razor files. And it's actually fixed in 17.5 Preview 6. So I know for a fact Dan does not have 17.5 Preview 6.
I don't.
And it should be there when that releases. And this is one of those examples of giving feedback helps us prioritize some things and make fixes that will make people's lives better. And
Preview 6 just dropped like within the last 40 minutes or so. So it's now available. If you're on the preview channel, looks like Preview 6 is now available in the preview channel. So I will be updating. Actually, I'll be doing that while you talk. You go ahead. But speaking about feedback, if you have feedback about a specific issue that you're actually witnessing, it's actually nicer if you give us the feedback through the tool, because it'll collect a bunch of diagnostics for us. And Allison is going to demo that. So if we can bring up her screen.
Yep, so hopefully this is big enough and people can see. But so there's kind of two different reporting mechanisms in Visual Studio and VS Code. So in Visual Studio, what we'd like you to do is hopefully reproduce whatever problem you're seeing. So for example, if I'm encountering some typing problem, just typing, and then afterwards going up to the small icon in this upper right corner that if you hover over it, it says send feedback. So I'll click that and then hit this report a problem button, and that should pop up a new window. Computer's a bit slow, so hopefully it comes up. Okay, so that popped up this window over here, and if I were to actually be reporting an issue, I would just be filling in this information, title, description. If you could include a screenshot, that would be super helpful. And this also just includes all the diagnostic info that we need to investigate and hopefully solve your problem. And eventually, this goes to the internal Visual Studio reporting tool, but it should eventually be directed towards the Razor team and then possibly move to the Razor repo in the future. So that's Visual Studio. And in VS Code, it's slightly similar, a little different. There's also in the upper right corner here, there's these 3 dots, and you can click that and click this button that says report a Razor issue. And so when you do that, you have these instructions here. And for example, we want to press start, reproduce the issue again, stop, which should then copy all the needed information to your clipboard. And then I would go to GitHub right here, click this, and then just copy and paste the data from the clipboard. That should give us all the logs and diagnostic information. There's a few pieces of information that we'd like you to fill out as well, reproduce steps and a description of the problem. And one thing that's not included here that would be helpful is screenshots. So if you could take a separate screenshot, we would appreciate that too, so that we could investigate. But
this demo was specifically requested by me because I had no idea any of this existed. And when we were talking before the call, I was like, wait, what? You can report that? So,
yeah, it's not very clear, but hopefully that helps people. And yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback. And you can also go to GitHub and upvote any issues that you're seeing, and the team will try to prioritize them and take a look.
I have good news. I just completed my 17.5 Preview 6 update, and I have lovely colors. John, if you want to like flip to my screen just real quick, lovely. Look at that. Look at those beautiful colors of JavaScript. Yes, that's fixed. So
wow, it's almost like we planned it. That was amazing.
It was not planned at all, actually, which is great. Love it. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to show that. Yes, we do try to listen to feedback as issues come in. Like Allison was showing, either through the VS feedback tool or through the Visual Studio Code report a Razor problem. That's the best way to report your issue. And I can understand if it's if you've reported issues in the past and didn't feel like they got a lot of traction. I can totally relate to that frustration. It can be difficult to reproduce in particular tooling issues, especially if they involve like a weird set of actions to actually get the issue to replicate. So as much details as you can give us that will reliably reproduce the problem, the better. If you can slim down the project, give us exact steps, exact versions of things, that really helps to move those issues forward. And we try to prioritize them.
Yep, that's like, I don't know, I always go off on this, right? I've worked with like the VS Mac team too, and like anytime they're always telling me that anytime you can use to report a problem, it's so much better than like complaining on Twitter or like, like just being frustrated about something. Like because you go through the report a problem and then it grabs all the logs, gets us all the build numbers, gets us all the information that we can use to diagnose it. But it also puts it on the dashboards that the PMs and the managers see. And so that really helps get bugs prioritized. So like you can complain about it and that might do something, but if you can actually do the report a problem, it actually like can escalate it. And it also, if multiple people report the same issue, it correlates the issues together. So we'll say, whoa, a lot of people are seeing this in this one specific build, and it really helps narrow things down.
One thing you can do to help us know that an issue has broad impact, and so first step is if you're hitting an issue, make sure to report it. Make sure don't suffer in silence. Let us know, or if you have a good feature idea or suggestion, or like rough edge to the tooling experience, like send those too. We want to hear about those. And then sometimes issues have been previously reported. If you see that, like in the .NET Razor repo, which is where the Razor editor team primarily operates, we do have stuff that's also on the back end, where our own internal tracking systems for some things. But given that the Razor LSP editor is mostly open source out on GitHub, that's where most of the work is happening. You can go through the issue tracker there, see if your issue's there, and then make sure you give it that +1, that thumbs up. So that's a signal that we use to say, oh, this isn't just one person that hit this on some random edge case, like multiple people are hitting this. Please don't game the system. Like, don't tell all your friends to thumbs up on a random issue. Only have them do it if they're actually hitting the problem. But that does give us another signal for us to know, like, hey, we really should be prioritizing this one above some of the other issues that are on a backlog. So give +1s. Visual Studio's feedback tool, the issues will initially go to the Visual Studio feedback website. There is a voting mechanism there as well. We do look at that too. Most of the Razor editor issues will move from the Visual Studio feedback tool to GitHub, because that's where we're doing our work. Unless it's something that's not directly Razor, like maybe it's something in the underlying editor or in Roslyn or stuff like that, then it might stay on the Visual Studio site. But most of them will move. So don't be surprised if you go to your issue that you submitted using the VS feedback tool and it looks like it got closed with it often will have a link to the specific GitHub issue that we duplicated it against. So go look at that GitHub issue and give that one the thumbs up so that we know to prioritize it.
Okay, here's a question I'm asking partly to make sure I'm paying attention. Is there a way to filter for the Razor specific issues in the repo? And I think that was something that that Phil showed earlier, that there's a specific repo now that those are being tracked in.
They may be asking like Blazor versus MVC, like CSHTML versus .Razor. I
think that's the specific, like the dot before Razor is, I think, being really specific here.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Most Razor issues honestly are shared. Like they're not. There's some stuff that's very specific to Blazor, but there's a lot of stuff that's just core functionality of what the Razor language is that is shared across both files. I don't think we do any sort of tagging to like say this one's about Blazor and this one's about MVC on the repo. But you can search for Blazor, you can search for .Razor, and that's probably a pretty good rough query for the issues that are Blazor specific. And it's worth noting that repo contains not just the Razor editor, but also contains the compiler as well. And those things are very tightly interconnected. Just like the Roslyn infrastructure for C# and the C# editing experience are very intertwined. Same thing with Razor. So in that same repo for .NET/Razor, that's where a lot of the Razor language features and syntax requests also get filed. So if you're waiting for like a particular feature in Razor, like, oh man, I really wish I could do like one common one that I know we need to do is namespace aliasing. Like when I do a using directive in C#, you can define an alias for the namespace so that you can then use that alias instead of the namespace in your C# code. We don't currently have a syntax that works for that in Razor. It's on the backlog in that .NET/Razor repo. If you care about specific Razor language features as well, give those thumbs up, and that helps.
Cool. All right. Well, here's a question which maybe is a leading thing, but future plans for Razor 2.
I was just going to say, Phil, we have to talk about the future.
If you can bring it up, I think I even have it on the right slide.
What does your crystal ball tell us?
There's kind of three topics we'll say. So one is performance and reliability. We're going to keep improving things, make it faster, make it do what you intend, more reliably. Like, no question, we've made a bunch of investment there. We're going to continue to make investment because until it's startlingly fast, we see opportunity there. But we're also looking for your specific feedback on a couple of things that we see a lot of issues on. And the issues it's not like there's one issue that can be upvoted. It's a bunch of different kind of issues in the same category. And the big ones are formatting. So given some content, what is the right way to format it? I think different people have different opinions, but there's also like a matter of following the settings that already exist that people are trying to set, and making sure all the different ways that you can nest this content and that content do the right thing. There's also IntelliSense, which I think is like 3 or 4 different features, depending upon who you ask. They'd say that thing's IntelliSense or that other thing's IntelliSense. So is it giving a completion list? Is it giving like the grayed out code that gives that option there? Is it giving squiggles when there's an error? Like everybody probably says IntelliSense is one of those, and I think someone would probably come up with or this other thing. But again, when there's an issue there, we say, ooh, is it about the squiggles, which I think we call diagnostics internally? Is it about the squiggles, or is it about the completion? Again, like with screenshots being helpful. But we understand that we're probably going to need some input to get that just right. And then we're also going to look through that list of issues and see how many thumbs ups there are, and try to pick up like the most impactful, best ROI. Like if it's 2 things are of similar widespread desire and one's a lot more expensive than the other, we'll tend to take the one that we can get to customers that much faster. I say tend because there's all sorts of things that go into that decision, but that is what we're intending to do. So I think,
I saw in the chat, or some of the chat, like some people were talking about things like, I've got a 1,000 or 2,000 line Razor file and I'm having issues when the file size gets big, or maybe your solution gets really big and things slow down. That's why the performance work, that reliability work is so important. We do hear that, and we are working to chase down those problems. Some of them are a combination of not just the editor, but also how the compiler currently functions. The Razor compiler is not a simple piece of technology. Like parsing through this mad combination of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Razor syntax, and C# and producing something reasonable is tricky business. And so we have actually a bunch of folks from the Roslyn C# team are now working on the Razor compiler and helping out with that, bringing some of that rigor to Razor, where in the past it may have been a little bit more organic. And we think we were already seeing some really good performance gains and improvements with some of the changes that are being made at that level. Razor formatting, yes. Should I talk to this, Phil? Should I
go for it?
We have heard for a while that formatting in Razor is an issue, that sometimes Visual Studio just seems to scramble the formatting of your files. We really want to get this issue nailed and fixed. To help us do that, we have a request for folks in the community. If you ever run across a situation where formatting of your Razor files is not what you wanted, please send that feedback to us. And we want basically 3 things. We want the original file before it was formatted. We want the expected formatted output, like what you wanted it to do. Tell us like how it should have been formatted, and then show us exactly what Visual Studio did to your file. That triplicate of items is what we want to see. And we're hoping to build up a corpus of opinions from our community about how Razor formatting should work. So please start mashing on that report a problem issue every time you see a Razor formatting issue that doesn't meet it doesn't meet your expectations. Give us those 3 things: the original file, how you wanted it formatted, and what actually happened. That's your homework. That's your homework for today.
Cool. All right. Well, that's all we specifically had to talk about. If we've got a couple of minutes for questions, we're happy to answer some and do our best at it. But thank you, everybody, for listening and giving us your time.
I think we covered. I think we got most of the questions. I don't. Let me see. There's one that Dan there about control KD. Let's see.
Format document.
Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's supposed to be like a plus in there someplace, right? Like, yeah. Format document. Or I know a lot of people hit this on format on paste. Like you copy some content into the Razor file, and then it automatically does a format. And I think for a while, I think currently with the previous releases of Visual Studio, there wasn't a way to turn that off. Like if you didn't like the formatting, there wasn't a way to say, please stop. I think, is that right, Phil? Or is that the different issue?
I think you might be talking about a different issue at the moment.
That
but
format on type, maybe it's format. There's one of them that we have an option that we are finally adding an option so that you can ask Visual Studio, please don't format in this particular case because I don't like the way you format. It's kind of a band-aid fix because we'd like to actually get to the place where Visual Studio does format things the way you want to format. But we do have some options that are coming that will hopefully allow you to tune the behavior a little bit better.
Cool. All right. Well, one, I guess, as we're kind of moving towards closing, because I don't see much else, there's been discussion for no super good reason other than that people love Blazor United, the Blazor United prototype. We've got that planned for next week, right, Dan?
Yes. We'll be doing a deep dive into where we're at with Blazor United. If you haven't watched the video yet, I think we got a link, akms/Blazor/United. Steve Sanderson put out that teaser trailer of some of the stuff we're doing for .NET 8. We should start to expect to see some of that work rolling out with, I think, the second preview of .NET 8, which we were getting close to the first preview of .NET 8, which usually is just like, can we still build it type of release. There's usually very little that's new that goes in the first preview for a new major version. But preview 2, I think we'll start to be pulling in the like the server-side rendering features from Blazor United as part of that release. But we'll be talking all about that next week.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we covered most of the questions. The team does go through the chat afterwards. Dan actually had us implement that feature. We roll up the chat logs and send them on over. So go over them in more details. And wow, this is great. Thank you so much for the update. It's great to hear the context too, like that there's a lot that goes into it. Sometimes it can be easy when you're typing, you're like, why is this? But there's so many moving parts, right? There's all the different things there's the editor and there's the compilers and the language servers and all the stuff, right? That all has to work together. So appreciate it. As a developer, I appreciate all the hard work.
We appreciate all the people who are patient with us and send us your feedback. That helps us make the product better for everyone.
Cool. Guess we'll wrap up there. So thanks a lot. Thanks for the presentations and thanks to all our viewers.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Thanks.